Welcome Internet. Today we're going to be talking about the complicated issue of zoophilia, i.e. sexual attraction towards animals. So, this is a very important topic as apparently, according to research I did for this video, it's much more common than what I thought. I thought it would be like less than 1%. Apparently it's between 1 and 2%, which purely on a statistical level, right, is about the same as schizophrenia. No correlations between both of those diagnoses, but in terms of numbers, we're roughly the same. So fundamentally, why I wanted to talk about it is that it's relatively unstudied and undocumented, because even though mental health professionals, be it the psychologist, the psychotherapist, the psychiatrist, we all know that it exists, but we don't talk about it. We don't really try and investigate, because I think there is a form of natural repugnation, rejection of it, and basically also, and this is important, people who have zoophilia do not tend to go to therapy. Like, they tend to only come when basically they're forced to, be it by the justice system, the families, so on and so forth. So basically they're not people that will spontaneously go to see a psychotherapist to talk about this. A bit as a lot of paraphilias are asexual perversions, they do not really want to go and see the therapist for that. Because often, and this is a generalization, it's not true in every case, but often they kind of, as Fernman would say, capitalize on their perversions, i.e. They don't want to get rid of it, they enjoy it. So at the point where you enjoy it, and when you have enjoyment of it, psychotherapy becomes much harder, because it's already hard to change when you want to change, but when you don't want to change, it's almost impossible, right? So what did I want to add about this topic? Well, first and foremost, I wanted to talk about how in zoophilia, it seems to me that it isn't merely sexual paraphilia, that it implies something much deeper, at least in the cases I have been given and which the people I've been able to work with. It seems to go far, far deeper than just a question of sexuality. Because the sin with zoophilia is that it seems to me that it implies the disconnect between humanity and animals. What I mean by that is that fundamentally it seems to me that from a very young age, the person that suffers from zoophilia has been rejected by humanity. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that very early on, the child has been dehumanized. A dehumanization that ran so deep that the child could not identify with other humans, that there was a kind of a blockage in this identification. Therefore, the child regresses or stays blocked at the stage of identifying with an animal. So identification with animals is very common with children, but often they go beyond that and they start identifying with other humans. In the case of zoophilia, I think that there is something that is blocked on that level of identification, in which a child cannot go beyond. Therefore, he stays stuck in the realm of the animal, in a way mixing themselves up. It's not just that they see animals as human, it's more that they see themselves as being closer to the beasts. So in French, it's even compounded by the fact that être bête means to be stupid, et une bête is an animal. So therefore we have the same word, at least on an auditory level, which means the same sin. And often there is this confusion of I am better, meaning I am stupid and I am the animal. And often it's very complicated to make them separate that from, no, you are human and you're part of the mainframe of humanity, be it in a different way, but just a part of it. And often it's something that they fight against, because they're very, very afraid to be humiliated for that very specific nature. So therapeutic work is already, as always, I have the feeling that I'm repeating myself, but very important for the people with zoophilia, to create a connection with the therapist in which there will be no a priori judgment and no belittlement on what has happened to them. Often, what I have found also to be very prevalent is this idea that they know that it's not something that is acceptable. Therefore, they will tiptoe around it. So, what makes them very specific is that, at least for the cases I have seen, they don't see where it's morally wrong. It's not about animal abuse for them. It's more about that they can't connect to other humans. Therefore, they connect to animals. And in that connection, they often don't see the wrongs of it. The only sin that I have seen that they can connect to is this idea of the law, i.e. the law prevents you from doing it, therefore you can't do it. And that has an impact, especially if they have already been condemned on just in the framing of the law. It often prevents them from acting out as spontaneously. And often the acting out is something in which they are very split. Often what I've observed is that people who have zoophilia are split between a side of them that wants to elevate to humanity, wants to rekindle, to reconnect with humanity, even sometimes wanting to have sexual relationships with other people, be it man or woman. But really that sense of maybe I can get out of it, so there's a pull towards humanity, but at the very same time there's an unconscious pull towards the animal, towards going back to the drive and the attraction to animals. So it's a very, very complicated framework in which there's often two forces competing. One that wants to go to the regressive part of basically reconnecting with the animal, and one that wants to grow out of it. And those two drives are constantly competing. Now, we could also go for a psychoanalytic interpretation, which in these cases would be very pertinent, i.e. for Freud, the whole explanation behind perversion is that there's a denial of female genitalia, i.e. that women don't have a penis. There's a denial, and for the pervert, the object, the fetish of their perversion is the substitute for the female genitalia. And in the cases I have had, Freud's observation seems to be accurate, that there is something like that of, for example, mother is all-powerful, mother is completely capable, mother is not lacking. And often, very interestingly, there's a link between mother and the animal. So I'm going to give a case of an Indian paper I read maybe a couple of years ago, which basically said that a child, they wanted to interrogate a child on his paraphilia. And basically they asked him to draw his mother, and he couldn't. He absolutely couldn't. He only basically could draw the animal. And fundamentally, this is something I've observed as well, is that there seems to be, at a certain level, a form of confusion between mother and animal, i.e. that mother is herself also dragged down to the animal realm. She's not conceived as human. And I'm talking about mother, but we could talk about father, right? It's the parental figures. I, in a way, do not connect to the humanity as a whole. There's a disconnection. And basically, the animal becomes the fetish, i.e. it becomes the absoluteness of sexuality, and even the pinnacle of relations, i.e. often the zoophiles feel more connected, even on an emotional level, to the animal rather than to mankind. So the aim of psychotherapy with these people is to try and reconnect them. This is very arduous, and I'm not going to lie, it's often very complicated and filled with moments where they progress, they regress, they progress, they regress. The idea here is to be able to open them to something else, to be able to give them the chance of being rehumanized, going beyond what they have experienced, all the suffering, all the pain, because that's what they are. They are people in pain and in suffering for the most part. Of course, there is a part of them that enjoys the fact of being in a sexual relationship with animals, but they're very split on the issue. It's not an easy thing for them. So we might come to terms with the fact that, yes, but you can't change a sexual orientation, you can't change an object choice. This is very true, you can't change it. However, some of them have more leeway, I feel, than others. Some of them don't just have one object choice. They might have a spectrum of them. If they have a spectrum, then it becomes possible to not completely grow out of it. That would be a fantasy, but at least be able to not act out upon the animal. Because even though they do not conceptualize it like that, having a sexual relationship with an animal is animal abuse, and it goes against law. So basically, to get them on the other side of the spectrum, or at least open up the possibility of the other side of the spectrum, of being rekindled with their humanity, offers them the chance of being able, A, to not get into problems, and B, offers them the ability to at least, on some level, form a connection. Because that's also an important part, is that they are often isolated. Isolated because sometimes there is shame around their sexual biases, let's say, and there's also a lot of reluctance to connect to another human. So therefore the therapist can be that first link to humanity and to the connection of humankind that they might need to be able to get themselves at least to a distance with the animal, or at least, at the very least, if they can't disconnect from that sexual attraction, at the very least they can contain it. It doesn't necessarily have to be in acting out, but it can be mentalized, which is already a step above, as there is no action, right, on the animal. But, and this is very important, there's always this dynamic, this temptation to go back to the drives that are there, but a part of them doesn't want to, because they want to also be able to master the drives. So it's a very complicated and subtle issue. I need to say that what I'm saying isn't the Bible, it isn't the gospel. What I mean by that is that it's not, what I'm saying is what I've observed and the conclusions I've came to, but it's not necessarily the truth with a capital T. And I want you to understand that fundamentally it's only one perspective of one professional. Since might change, there might be much more subtlety, there might be less leeway than I think also. So I want you to just keep that in mind when you think about this video. Nevertheless, I find it an important topic to talk about. It's often something that is a bit repudiated, a little silenced because no one wants to talk about it. But I think that talking about it can also help us clinicians understand how to help those people who often have suffered a lot of humiliation, belittlement and trauma. So it's not just a sexual enjoyment of the animal or absolute evil perversion, right? It's people who have suffered, who unfortunately reenact that suffering through sexuality because they've been dehumanized, meaning that their suffering goes within the animal instead of being metabolized and thought about in the deepest sense of the word. I also talked a lot about the parents, but it's not to say that it's the parents that failed. I think that it's like anything, right? Here I'm going through what I've observed. But, and this is very important, there might be other cases that I haven't seen. And last but not least, and this is obvious, but I'm going to end up on this, for there to be that zoophilia, there often has to be exposure to an animal in early childhood. That there isn't necessarily zoophilia when there isn't an animal, but it's not because there's an animal that there's zoophilia, because there have been much more cases, if not. So basically, I hope this was clear, and I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.